something that to me or to you, Tara, might taste disgusting, it would taste wonderfully to that patient because it's much harder for them to taste things.
This is On Nutrition, a podcast from Mayo Clinic where we dig into the latest nutrition trends and research to help you understand what's health and what's hype. I'm Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This episode, eating during cancer. But first, we have a listener question.
Hey, Tara. My name's Jake, and I had a question about how food impacts your skin. I know, sugary foods can give you acne, and salty foods or alcohol can kind of puff up your face, and I was curious if the opposite is also true. Can you eat your skincare, basically? Okay, thanks.
Hey, Jake. I'm a skincare girly myself, so I love this question. You're not likely to have drastic Kris Jenner-type results with just nutrition. Dramatic results require dramatic intervention. But the good news is what's healthy for your skin is what's healthy for the rest of your body. You know I have to shout out fruits and vegetables and essentially any plant-based food, which are helpful at preventing damage that can lead to early skin aging. Antioxidants and phytonutrients found in fruits, veggies, whole grains, and legumes can help protect your cells. And of course, drink plenty of water to help keep your skin hydrated too. And experts agree. Nutrients like vitamins A, C, D, and E, and essential fatty acids all benefit your skin. So what does that mean for your diet? Consider the usual advice: eating fish, berries, and healthy fats like avocados, nuts, and seeds. As always, it's important to keep our vices in moderation, so try to limit ultra-processed foods, especially those high in fat and sugar, excess dairy, and alcohol. These all have a link to poor skin health. So nourish your skin from the inside out in all the ways you probably already know how. What's good for the inside will show on the outside. If you have a question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we'll answer it in a future episode. Now, on to the show. Cancer is a tough but common disease. According to the National Cancer Institute, about 38% of American adults will get a diagnosis within their lifetime. So what should they expect? What are the impacts of treatment on the body, and how can they use nutrition to handle the side effects? Here to walk us through what is within our control is Peter Adintori, an oncology dietitian and professor at New York University in New York City. Peter teaches students and patients about the resources within their healthcare team, how to deal with the shifting appetite, and whether some of the rumors about cancer-causing foods are just plain false. Peter, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. To start things off, let's talk about the relationship between food and cancer. People, the internet, will make these big claims that certain foods cause, I'm putting that in quotes, cancer. Then there are other foods that prevent or even treat, that as a question mark, cancer and its symptoms. How much can we actually control with our diet?
So this is a loaded question to get us started. So very exciting.
Welcome to the podcast.
My perspective is that our food choices are one of the various tools in our toolbox. And I don't like to understate that there is some power and control over food choices and how those might influence someone's risk for cancer, how someone's feeling while they're getting treatment, or someone's risk for recurrence of cancer if they're already in a survivorship phase. And that being said, it certainly is not the end-all be-all for anyone. So I'm a big advocate for kind of the big picture thinking when you think about lifestyle in general. So incorporating food choices alongside movement and sleep and stress and other things that folks have under their sphere of control, especially during times when cancer is often not in their control, whether their diagnosis itself or the treatment plan or which treatment they're going to receive or when. It's really difficult to control much of that. So I do like to sort of have a nice blend between recognizing that folks do have control over the food choices they make and also know that they don't have to put so much pressure on themselves.
I completely agree. And also knowing that yes, we have a sense of control over what we eat, but even that's a complexity of what risk factors for cancer or cancer reoccurrence are modifiable and which are completely out of your control. So How do you, when you're talking to patients, compare the influence of diet to something like genetics?
Yeah, so I can definitely use the example of the patients I treat primarily, which are patients that have blood cancers. And many of those cancers have very little influence of modifiable risk factors that we know of, right? There may be some, but we just haven't researched that as a field just yet. And so it's a really difficult conversation that I have because certain people come to me otherwise healthy and they're really confused as to how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
There are other cancers where we do have a pretty strong connection between certain modifiable risk factors like smoking or drinking alcohol. And then there are some cancers that kind of sit nicely in the middle where there are some associations with excess weight or having a less healthful diet long term. But again, those are such difficult risk factors to pinpoint where you can't necessarily say that, oh, it's absolutely the way this person ate or where they lived or how they decided to move their body throughout the week, whatever it is. And so I always like to have a sort of big picture view when I'm ever having this conversation, especially when folks have that sort of worried picture about, how did I get here?
Yeah.
What did I do to deserve this? Or sort of what did I do to kind of get myself in this situation? And I think a lot of the times some of that uncertainty can be worked through in a way that's really gentle and also really helps to kind of ease some of those anxieties and recognize that regardless of how folks got to where they are, there's always a path forward. And what that looks like is very collaborative.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I'm sure you have this conversation of regardless of your previous lifestyle choices, regardless of your previous health, we're here now and let's talk about moving forward in the most realistic, healthful, and healing way.
Absolutely.
How does cancer or cancer treatment change a person's nutritional needs?
So generally, as dietitians, when I'm seeing someone with cancer, with a cancer history or sort of is about to start treatment and their disease is still pretty active, I consider them to have a little bit of a higher threshold for their nutritional needs. So what that means is that their body is working a little bit harder underneath the hood, as I like to say, where they may not be able to feel it or they may not know it's happening, but it may be burning calories a little bit more quickly, while also the disease process itself and also the treatment that's upcoming make it harder to eat for a variety of reasons. And, when I talk to folks about this, I usually classify it as either it makes it hard to eat enough or it makes it hard to eat a wide variety of foods, which really limits folks. And it turns them off to, a variety of different foods, which can kind of ebb and flow throughout their time with cancer. And so really what we are working on when we're working on someone's relationship with food and we're also working on their relationship with their disease and their body is understanding where they are with their intake at that time and where should they be from all the various calculations that we do on the back end to kind of say, okay, I think you might need X number of calories or X number of grams of protein, and realizing that that's not a perfect system either. And so a lot of it is just kind of being flexible as we move through the treatment process to understand what someone's ability to nourish themselves looks like, right? And that can change on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis. And so something I love to share with my patients early on in the process is to just take it one meal at a time. And so kind of reframing that in some ways to folks to not overwhelm themselves can be really important.
Has anyone ever told you that they were going to try to treat their cancer with diet alone?
Thankfully, I haven't in a long time. However, those cases always make me really sad because I think what we see is you'll see it in someone's chart that they were initially diagnosed X number of years ago, early stage cancer, and they decided they wanted to try non-traditional means to treat their cancer, whether that be getting a third, fourth, fifth opinion, trying alternative holistic methods. These things all have a place when they're used in tandem with conventional treatment. It's the people that start with low stage cancer, try to cure it without conventional treatments, and then they come back to us a couple of years down the road with a much more difficult to treat, much more advanced cancer that could have been taken out and could have been healed years prior.
How can poor nutrition cause or exacerbate symptoms? And this is so difficult because poor nutrition is likely because of what they're going through, but now it can also exacerbate what they're going through. So what are some of the things that you see related to this?
So while folks are still feeling somewhat okay, I like to have this conversation that centers around having a eating pattern that seems a little bit less traditional for them. So things that are maybe smaller meals a little bit more frequently throughout the day, because that just might feel better in their stomach. And really connecting the dots for them that even if they're living in a larger body and have been wanting to lose weight, and now they're internally thinking that, oh gosh, now I have cancer, like I'm going to finally lose this weight I've been trying to lose. And I've heard that 1,000 times. I always encourage folks that weight loss itself can actually make the treatment not feel quite as good as if they were able to hold on to that weight. And I at one point had a patient tell me like the Newton's laws of physics approach to things, a body in motion stays in motion. And so I really have taken that into my own philosophy of how I encourage folks to really try to maintain their eating pattern, try to maintain their movement pattern as much as is tolerated, because I have found over the years that the folks that are able to kind of lean into that normalcy in some capacity do tolerate treatment a little bit better. And I think something that resonates with folks, especially in early days of treatment, where nausea is a very common symptom and so is loss of appetite, it's not to overwhelm themselves with their favorite foods and these really rich foods, because it's likely not going to sit very well. And a pearl that I always tell folks, especially when they're nauseous, is to avoid any foods they'd be afraid of sort of throwing to the wayside for a while. So I've had countless experiences of someone telling me this family recipe that they've been eating since they were a child. They can't eat anymore because they were nauseous, and now it is associated. So I encourage folks to pick up those bland foods that you don't care if you ever eat it again, and it's okay to throw by the wayside for a bit if you're nauseous, but to steer away from the ones that you'd be upset to throw away for a while. And when I'm meeting with people that are later on in their cancer process, they're like, gosh, I wish you gave me that advice 6 months ago when I started treatment, because I haven't had pizza in a year and I haven't had, spaghetti and meatballs or things that are very like hearty and feel like home to them. So I think it's really important to kind of meet folks where they are in that initial moment and also not speak too much into existence. So I don't like to give too many ideas of what might happen, but I say, let's just address things as they do happen. And I'll give you some tools along the way to help you out with that.
I love that. There's already enough fear coming into that appointment sometimes. On the flip side, we're going to spin things positively now, Peter. How can good nutrition help with symptoms?
I recognize that a lot of patients, it's scary to take medications, and they're already taking umpteen medications while they're getting treatment. And I always encourage my patients to sort of use medications as needed to manage symptoms, aligned with also making good food choices, because neither one by themselves is likely to be the answer, but doing both of these things can be really helpful. And to do small changes and things at one time, right? Because especially when folks are very nauseous and they're worried to eat, what happens a lot of the time in my experience is people will find one more food or two more foods that are now being tolerated well, and it gives them more confidence that they can start to really expand what foods are being able to be ingested without feeling any worse symptoms. And so sometimes that fear of that speed bump of the first food, second food can be really limiting. Finding the right blend of medications and foods is really helpful.
Yeah, and it's okay to experiment with, and we're not talking about experimental drugs, we're talking about experimenting with a prescribed medication. It doesn't have to stay on forever. And I'm assuming you would at least encourage your patients to tell their healthcare team or ask their healthcare team members about anything, right? Like, I'm experiencing nausea, I'm experiencing constipation, I'm experiencing diarrhea. I've heard on the internet about drugs that help with hunger. Can we talk about that, right? It never, ever hurts to ask. That's exactly what all these people went to very many years of school for. This is their expertise, this is what they're passionate about. So at the end of the day, never hide what you're experiencing, never hide symptoms, because there truly may be a solution for you.
100%. And I definitely think it's important to be aware of all the different folks that can help with different aspects of how folks are feeling, because the doctors and the nurses have one perspective. The dietitians have a lot to offer, as do physical therapists and occupational therapists. And so do folks like social work or psychology, like we all have a role to play. And I'm a big advocate for just getting as many folks on board, even if you don't need them urgently, just being aware of how they can support you and who you might contact should things come up. And so I always advocate for my patients to just engage everyone as early in the process as possible, even if there aren't any acute needs, just to kind of start that relationship.
Absolutely. I like to remind patients that there's a whole team of people there for them. Are there any specific diets you recommend based on someone's cancer or treatment type?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about all these different types of diets that folks can try to either directly fight their cancer or prevent it from recurring or any of these things. And I will say we don't have very strong evidence that there is any specific or particular type of diet that I could recommend without any reservations. The guidelines that we recommend for a general American or anyone for a general healthy diet are not drastically different than someone that has a history of cancer. The only major differences that I like to highlight are that it's pretty clear that alcohol has a relationship with many types of cancer. And so if someone is open to limiting or excluding alcohol from their diet, that's something I'm open to discussing, right? And the other piece I like to highlight is that there's likely benefit for increasing the amount of protein sources that come from plant sources. So things like beans and nuts and seeds and soy products like tofu or edamame, like these sources of protein are really beneficial for a lot of reasons. And it's not something we see that someone has in their diet often, but these sort of small changes can make a big difference long term and something that also just makes folks feel well.
I always tell people look for common denominators in well-established diets or in research. So people will ask me like, okay, well, should I do Mediterranean or should I do DASH? Or should I go by the American Institute of Cancer Research guidelines or the American Diabetes Association? And what I'll say is those are all legit, but guess what they all have? Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, heavily plant-based, healthy fats. So we don't need a name. We don't need like a trademark. Let's just do what every single institution has told us to do and have like a plant-forward, healthful, nutrient-dense diet.
Absolutely. And I also recognize that it's so important to just meet folks where they are. I want it to feel like something they can do for weeks to months to years and something they wouldn't discourage their friends or their family from doing as well, right? So these are things that feel feasible and interesting and enjoyable. And that's just as important as their nutrient quality.
Yeah. And you bring up a great segue to my next question, which is about helping people maintain their nutrition while they're limited in their eating, right? Because we know that people with cancer often experience unintentional weight loss. So you and I, as their dietitians, are trying to like cram more calories, more protein, more nutrients into this like smaller bucket, right? Or smaller plate, if you want to use a food analogy. And we have to be mindful of symptoms and we have to be mindful of someone's food preferences, but we're trying to get them the best nutrition. But is that just going to be a nutritional supplement? How do you help people balance this challenge?
Something I start with is just understanding what someone's normal eating pattern is as a baseline, then guides what I might suggest and also what they're open to, right? So I have some patients that tell me I had some sort of hospitalization a year ago and I really relied on those supplements when I was in the hospital and that was so helpful. And I will never say that's good or bad. And I will say my preference as a dietitian is to do food first as often as we can. And sometimes that's feasible and sometimes that's not. So I'm a big fan of smoothies and adding in additional protein powders into there to get some additional protein in there, because that for a lot of people feels close to eating regular food because it's just blended fruits, vegetables, and whatever else they'd like to add in there. Sometimes that feels a little bit more doable than all the steps that go into preparing and eating and cleaning up after a meal. All these things can be really daunting for folks.
We have this shake and smoothie list that our dietitians have, and it's kind of off the menu because it takes a little bit of extra effort from the kitchen, but we can make you an 800-calorie shake. And for you to sit down and eat and chew and swallow 800 calories, is a lot of work when you are not feeling well. So that's exactly what we'll have people do. Maybe you can sip on that all day and we'll put it over ice, or we'll keep it in your fridge when you're not napping. But it's just such a convenient way, which is why I believe that these supplements have a role, or can have a role in someone's treatment, that it's just so much easier than force feeding someone. If you've ever not felt well and someone's like, you should eat a sandwich, you're like, yeah, no thanks. Like, go away.
Say what you want about AI, but it's here. And it's helping businesses get more done in a day. Wix's website builder is infused with AI so you can stay ahead. Create a beautiful, functional website just by describing your idea. Track how your site appears in AI search results. Create custom images on demand, or launch an entire campaign in a matter of minutes. Wix gives you AI wherever you need it. Try it out for yourself at Wix.com.
Just like there are very few factors within our control to prevent cancer, it's difficult to control symptoms of cancer with movement, sleep, stress management, or food, but they can all make a difference. As a patient, your appetite and food tolerances may change, so take it one meal at a time. Maybe that means doing smaller meals throughout the day, drinking more supplements, or blending everything into a smoothie. Following your normal eating and movement pattern may help you tolerate treatment a little better. But of course, life isn't normal anymore, so you may have to avoid your favorite comfort foods as you deal with nausea and opt for blander foods instead. There's no optimal diet for cancer treatment, though it is a good idea to limit alcohol and prioritize plant-based proteins like beans, tofu, or edamame. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, so tell your healthcare team about all of your symptoms. They may be able to suggest a solution. Now let's talk about some of those symptoms and solutions, and how the way you prepare your food may change too. There is a long list of symptoms or treatment side effects that we see as dietitians in the cancer world. We've got appetite loss, constipation, diarrhea, dry mouth, mouth sores, nausea, difficulty swallowing, vomiting, weight gain, weight loss. I won't make you go through all of those, but what are the most common ones that you see and feel like you can do something about with nutrition?
Nutrition is one tool, right? A lot of the time, what I tell patients or I encourage them to think about is, okay, you've been feeling this symptom or these symptoms. Unfortunately, these aren't beautifully happening in one symptom at a time. Sometimes they creep up on us all at once. And so I always ask, how bothersome is this to you? How long has this been going on for? How severe is it? When is it worse throughout the day? And this is all if patients feel okay to talk to me. Sometimes they're feeling so badly that they're like, Peter, I can't think about or talk about food. I need you to come back later, and I will wish them well and I will leave them alone. But for the folks that do feel open to discussing these things, I always like to sort of flip the conversation onto the patient to say, what have you tried? And I'm sure this is not the first time you've been nauseous in your life. Tell me what you've tried in the past, what's worked for you, or what have you been reading, or what have you been trying? Or I might have an ability to kind of connect a couple different symptoms together and say, actually, if you try this one thing, this may help with this symptom, this symptom, and this symptom. And that can be useful. So the example I can give is that sometimes people will have a lot of changes to the way things taste or the way things feel in their mouth. And that can be directly related to the treatment, or that can be related to how dry their mouth feels. So sometimes just treating the dry mouth itself with, foods that are a little bit more wet, naturally like a soup, or things that have sauces or gravies on them, might be a double whammy where it can help with the taste changes and it can help with the dry mouth. So that really kicks off two symptoms. And same thing goes for when people have a really hard time tasting things. I always tell them, just kick up the flavor when you can in that way. Something that to me or to you, Tara, might taste disgusting, it would taste wonderfully to that patient because it's much harder for them to taste things. So not to be afraid to use a little bit of extra spices, a little bit of extra salt, things like that to kind of amp up the flavor. That can really help break through some of those challenging symptoms. And then I would say it's rare that I can fix any of the symptoms that happen with someone's bowel movements and things just with food. But I definitely encourage folks to think about both what medications they're using and then what things they can do for themselves. So maybe if they're having looser bowel movements, to have foods that are going to help make those bowel movements a little bit more firm. Or if they're not having bowel movements, make sure they're moving around, make sure they're hydrating well, make sure they're incorporating some foods that can help promote some bowel movements there while they're taking any medications as well, because that's also another source of pain that no one needs, is being backed up. Very uncomfortable.
When you were talking about double whammies, I was actually thinking of hydration, right? So, and I work with a lot of patients who are on GLP-1s, and I'm like, okay, you told me that you're feeling fatigue. You told me that you're struggling with constipation. You told me that you're a little bit lightheaded. Just increasing your hydration truly might fix all three of them. And it's not perfect, and it's not always a surefire answer, but it's not going to hurt to hydrate you. Let's start somewhere, right?
Yeah, and I think that also is such an important point when it comes to people during these hot months, right? We are in the thick of summer right now, and it's been very hot. So I always tell folks, if you're losing a bunch of water and sweat while you're going from appointment to appointment, or you're going for a walk outside, you want to make sure you have hydration with you. And maybe that needs to be a little bit more than just water, because you might be losing a lot of extra electrolytes and things. And so thankfully, electrolytes, I think, are pretty hot right now in the nutrition field. So there's a lot of options out there for electrolyte powders and things that you can add to regular water, or there's already made electrolyte drinks that come with various types of blends of electrolytes. And it does make a big difference in some people how they feel. And it can be their lightheadedness and all of that, or it can just be how their energy levels are feeling after hydrating.
And if we need more than that, if we need calories and protein and electrolytes, guess what? There's beverages with all three of those.
Absolutely.
Food preparation itself, especially when you're trying to have this healthy, like plant-forward diet, can really be a burden when you're undergoing cancer treatment. You might be tired is a huge one. You might be nauseous, like we're talking about. You might just not have the energy for a nutritious home-cooked meal. What are some strategies that you recommend for how patients deal with that?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question and a really important topic. So there's a couple of approaches that I would use. So the first, if I'm thinking about a person and other themselves, I'm a big, big advocate for what I like to call ingredient prepping. So recognizing that people don't have to prep the whole meal, right? Meal prepping sounds exhausting and boring, but if someone has some energy and they want to chop up a bunch of vegetables that then they can use throughout the week, or they want to prep a pot of, some sort of their favorite grain so they can then have it in different forms throughout the week, you can kind of do that to do piecemeal of certain types of meals. In addition, I always tell people, you have a very difficult process ahead of you with treatment, or maybe you're in the thick of it, not to be afraid to lean on people, right? One of the ways people love to show their love is through food, right? So whether that's helping with food preparation or giving someone a home cooked meal, it's something that people can do and will love to do, whatever that might look like. And then the last option I like to give folks are meal kits. So it takes the thinking out of it, but maybe then, so you don't have to do the shopping and the preparing, but then maybe it's almost ready and then you can kind of put it together or have someone help you put it together, right? So there's lots of strategies depending on where someone is. And again, that might change on a day-to-day basis, but I think that's absolutely okay. And it's something that can make a big difference in how well someone can, feel nourished. And again, they have control over these things when it's their own food they're preparing.
This is also, and I'm assuming you also give people the opportunity without guilt to go buy a frozen bag of vegetables, or to buy a can of soup, or to buy a veggie platter or a fruit platter. It's okay, right? And I love your sentiment about support, because that's what I was thinking. You do not need a whole freezer full of lasagnas. So even if it's getting specific, like, hey, would you mind grilling me some chicken and throwing it in a Ziploc baggie? Or like, soup is really tasting good right now. Do you have a favorite soup recipe you wouldn't mind bringing over? If someone told me that, I would literally make them 100 kinds of soup and show up at their door the next day.
Absolutely. I think it's such a wonderful thing that people can do to support someone while they're going through treatment, and they're always looking for ways to help. And it's very easy as a patient to say, like, no, I'm okay. I don't need anything. Don't want to burden anyone. But it feels so good for the person on the other side of that to be able to support where they can. And that's often something someone can do.
Exactly. I think I've learned actually a lot of my food safety knowledge from our friend and colleague, Joy Heimgartner, repeat guest of Mayo Clinic on Nutrition. And we know that patients going through cancer treatment are often immunocompromised. So food safety becomes more important because foodborne illness could be more serious for them than it is for you or I. What are some precautions that folks should take when they're selecting or preparing foods?
Historically, people that have had a history of cancer who maybe are not new to this idea of being immunocompromised, they have a awareness of the fact that there used to be a lot of diets that were immensely restrictive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like a safe place for them. And now, as we evolve in our understanding of food safety, we recognize that there isn't a specific diet that people need to follow, right? Really, what it boils down to is just teaching good food safety practices that honestly any person could follow, right?
Yes.
It just becomes a little bit more important for people that's immune system is not quite ready to handle an infection the same way that yours or mine might be. What I boil it down to in a simplified way is to try to maintain as much control as possible over someone's food environment. So making sure things are washed, making sure things are hot when they should be hot, making sure things are cold when they should be cold and they stay that way, and just making sure that the surfaces that people are working on, the environments where they're eating are clean and, they aren't introducing sources of potential contamination or potential foodborne illness. And that goes for takeout from restaurants, that goes for grocery shopping, anything like that. So there's nothing that's strongly off limits except for things that can't be well cooked to the right internal temperature. It doesn't have to be like killed and dead. It just needs to be at the right temperature to be safe. So there can still be lots of flavor, a lot of really great texture to that. And they just wash whatever they have.
But I love that you said we're taking it from the lens of like, this is just general food safety, but you, if you're the patient, are at higher risk. Like, no one should eat the chicken salad that's been sitting at your Labor Day picnic for multiple hours. Like, that should be thrown away. You shouldn't eat it. I shouldn't eat it. Like, goodbye, chicken salad on a picnic table. It just freaks me out to even think
Yes,
about it.
absolutely.
But yeah, this is just your good old food safety guidelines.
The information is out there and really easy to follow, and it's meant to be practical. It's meant to be open and not intimidating. So certainly there are many clinicians that can answer these questions, but there's also a lot of really great information on the websites about food safety that can really help guide folks too.
And like you said, I think that we've actually lightened up a little bit, and our intentions were good 10, 15 years ago when we were probably overly cautious. That's not a bad thing to be in the medical field. But I remember we weren't letting people have pepper. Do you remember this? Because of like the risk of... Okay, I'm not crazy. I might be old, but I'm not crazy. Okay, we can have pepper now. Yes?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. We were like worried about people inhaling it, right?
That, and then I know Joy and I love to talk about unpasteurized honey, like raw honey,
Oh,
as
yeah.
Joy is a beekeeper.
She's a beekeeper.
And recognizing that there's nothing less food safe about unpasteurized honey, but really we know that that comes from the fear of unpasteurized dairy, which we know that is definitely a huge
different.
risk.
Yes.
But unpasteurized honey, it doesn't have the same risk. So that tells a lot of my patients that they can have the raw honey and they get excited because they love the way it tastes and they have it in their tea or they have it from the farmer's market or what have you. And I tell them to, leave the unpasteurized eggs and dairy at the farmer's market, whatever you need to do, but you can pick up the honey if you want to.
We know there's a wide range of symptoms that come with a cancer diagnosis, like changes in your appetite and weight, constipation, diarrhea, dry mouth, nausea, and difficulty swallowing. And sometimes they can all happen at once. There are various solutions, like seasoning your food more than usual or getting more electrolytes. And you may need to adapt your behaviors. If you don't have the energy to cook like you used to, you can try ingredient prepping, meal kits, or leaning on your community to help you cook, even when it's hard to ask for help. Food safety also becomes more important when you're immunocompromised. The standard rules apply. Cleaning surfaces, washing produce, and maintaining proper internal temperatures for foods are all crucial to avoid serious risk. But there's still a lot of misinformation about what foods cause cancer in the first place. So let's finish up with some myth busting. Can we play true or false?
Sure, I would love to.
Peter, true or false? Sugar feeds cancer.
That's a big false,
Ugh.
and we can have a whole podcast
We
just dedicated to
can.
that topic. So I would say definitely false, and happy to talk more about that in a bit.
This is another one that I really hate. You need to avoid soy, or that soy is linked or causes estrogen-based cancer.
So I would definitely say false and exactly the opposite, right? So just to give my one-liner here that I always like to give is that those data were based in mice initially, and it was also based in supplemental soy that people were taking in
Yes.
like a pill form.
They were not
right?
eating tofu.
Exactly.
Which they're
So the
welcome
soy
to.
that you get from tofu or edamame or other sources of soy usually have other really great benefits to them too. So I'm a big fan of soy foods, soy milk, these kinds of things, and their role in really supporting overall health. And certainly for folks with cancer, or a history of cancer, it can be really helpful.
Hey, there's one of your plant-based proteins, everyone. There you go.
A very
Soy.
good source.
Exactly. Closest to dairy if you don't want to do dairy. Kind of similar to number one. So true or false, carbs, I can't even read this because it stresses me out so much. Carbs feed cancer cells. So if you have cancer, you should follow a raw food or keto or low carb diet.
Yeah, so I think this is false. However, there is a lot of interest in this area. So I am all about, as a dietitian, holding space for what someone wants to try to do. I will say with avoiding carbs, it's really hard to get enough energy and enough nutrients. That being said, there are certainly ways to nourish someone's body that are not based on how many grams of certain nutrients they're getting. But I will say it's really, really hard to eat a high-fat diet when you're going through a bunch of symptoms that your gut is not so happy, right? So if there's an opportunity for us to eat carbs that are a little bit more gentle on our gut, by all means, that's going to be my first guess. And I would say, being very Italian myself, if someone tried to take my carbs away, I would be very angry. So I usually am very pro-carb for many reasons.
Same. I would just be so crappy. I just know I would. True or false, you should only eat when you're hungry.
Oh, this is such a hard one to say false to, because anyone who has had to try to eat when they were not hungry knows how difficult it is, right? But it is imperative in many ways to just make sure your body is fueled. And the key point here is just those small amounts of food every few hours are much, much more achievable for folks than trying to set that lofty goal of having 3 moderately to large sized meals, depending on how much nutrition someone needs to keep themselves nourished. And so for a lot of my patients, I just tell them, I know it's hard to think about eating a full meal. However, if we can make those meals smaller, this might feel more achievable, and kind of listening to what their body feels like it can tolerate at that point.
And if you don't eat your whole meal, put it back in the fridge. And when you're ready, reheat it if it was supposed to be hot. You can have a few more bites later.
Absolutely.
Oh, I actually like this one. I want to learn from you. Eating organic foods lowers your risk of cancer. True or false?
So I would say false. And the caveat there is that eating a well-balanced diet with fruits and vegetables, which is usually what we think of when we think of organic foods, can reduce your risk of cancer, but they don't need to be organic. There's nothing special about organic foods. And so there really isn't a big benefit to organic. But if someone is really passionate about only having organic produce, I definitely allow them to do that, as long as it's not counterproductive to what their overall goals are.
Yes. We as dietitians are not going to ask that you do that. But if that's a value of yours, or if that's a high passion of yours, then go for it. True or false, antioxidants are cancer-fighting foods that will lower your risk of cancer.
Yeah, so this one also, it's a hard true or false, because it's not true as a statement, but again, foods that are high in antioxidants tend to be good for you in general, right?
Yes.
So fruits, vegetables are very high in antioxidants. Things
Coffee.
like beans and coffee and nuts and seeds, like all these plant-based things have wonderful antioxidants in them. And again, the food sources of these things can't necessarily overdo it, but it's when you supplement with antioxidants, things like vitamin C, vitamin E, these will be a little bit too high of doses that you would get in a pill form.
Yeah.
And so, getting them in food is not a bad idea. the thing that's likely doing the job is the treatment that you're getting in that moment.
But also eating fruits and vegetables, et cetera, that are high in antioxidants may also be reducing your risk of other diseases that, even though your cancer is being treated with conventional medicine, maybe you're reducing your risk of heart disease or Alzheimer's or dementia. So welcome to On Nutrition with Tara and Peter. Eat your fruits and vegetables.
That's it. That's going to be our tagline, right?
Goodbye.
Fruits and vegetables are great.
Said every dietitian ever in the world. All right. Lastly, we also have kind of sometimes a scare tactic around cancer-causing foods. Now, a few of these are actually on the list of what I would call potential carcinogens, and sometimes they get a big media push around them. So let's go through some of them. Burned or browned non-animal foods, like burned toast. We literally saw this online when we were prepping for this episode, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't handle the internet.
So that one's false, and I would say probably doesn't taste so great, but if you love your toast burnt for some reason, go for it. You have my seal of approval.
Let's talk about where this likely came from, and my guess is that it came from the charred meat, which is a real thing.
Exactly. So that's really the big difference, right? So if we burn your pizza crust or your toast or your bagel in the morning or what have you, that makes me sound very New York, but it is what it is. Those don't have as much risk as some of the types of carcinogens that are produced when you grill meats, right? Like on the grill in the summer, which taste delicious. However, those really burnt pieces can have a risk of cancer. And again, these are not causative per se, but they definitely don't help, right? Especially if you're either have a rich family history of cancer or you have a history of it yourself or you're actively going through treatment.
What about just red meat in general? So I like to call red meat our four-legged mammals, right? Mm-hmm. Cows, pigs. Are kind of the biggest ones.
Yeah, exactly. So there are some associations that have been put out there with red meat and also with processed meats. And those kind of I put into the same bucket, right? Because the certainty of the evidence is somewhat similar, that some of the major connections are between things like colorectal cancer, which unfortunately is getting to be much more common in earlier years, which is scary. And so something that I encourage folks to do is just take a look at how often they're having red meat and processed meat and say, okay, where is there an opportunity for you to either swap that for something else or to just reduce how frequently or what size portion you're having, right?
Mm-hmm. Bacon is a great example. Deli meat is a great example of, there's probably some evidence that we shouldn't be having these things on the regular, just like alcohol. Probably not any nutritional benefits that I can truly think of. However, if it's Sunday brunch and you want a piece or two of bacon, you have it, but let's not have it every day. Let's also not put it on your cheeseburger. Ideally, that's at a fast food restaurant, and I don't know if that's even meat, but it's some kind of processed meat in there, right? So we can always talk about, I've said this 100 times, how often and how much. What about the concern of hormones in the animals that we eat? So in chicken and cattle.
I would say that doesn't tend to have an effect at all on hormone levels or cancer levels in people's body. I always like to say that there's like a kind of it would be very difficult for the body to take in those hormones and then adjust our hormones, right? Like our hormone balance in our body is very complicated, and that's a good thing, right? We don't want it to be easy to change. Otherwise, we would all be crazy all the time if our hormones were all over the place every single day. Think about like early stages of, I was going to say, people in early days of pregnancy, right? It really challenges when our hormones fluctuate. That's always what I go back to is like first trimester of pregnancy is a rough road because we're not used to that hormonal fluctuation. But thankfully, our bodies are usually pretty good at regulating our hormones. And so if you do take in something that has hormones, again, the risk there is less about the hormones themselves and more about how frequently are you having animal-based products, especially red meats and things, and what the existing relationships are between that and the type of cancer you're at risk for.
And there's one more food on my list, which I always thought the opposite of. So hopefully you're going to agree with me. Coffee is on this list. Do people think that coffee causes cancer?
Unfortunately, and actually, I think there's new data that is quite the opposite, that
That's
it like reduces the risk of certain cancers.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, if someone's coffee has a lot of cream and all these things in it every single time, and you're having 4 to 5 of those a day.
If it's $9, it's probably not coffee.
It's probably not great, right? So there are ways to consume coffee that are actually beneficial for our health. And there are ways to consume coffee where it's certainly not the most nutritious option for you. And granted, there's such a time in life for a latte, right? We all love a latte once in a while. And so it's nice to do that. And certainly I love to give people that pass, especially if they're having a hard time finding calories. That's a great way to add in some additional calories, is to kind of soup up that coffee. And we're now in the phase of protein coffee. And so I'm a fan of, if people want to add protein to their coffee, knock themselves out.
Go for it, man.
No problem. I have not joined that club yet. I'm very purist about my coffee, but that's just the way that I am.
Get your antioxidants in your bean juice.
That's it.
As close to the bean as possible. So I'm hearing that when it comes to a bacon cheeseburger, never again or once a year? Or what would be your, what's your threshold here?
Yeah, I get that question a lot of just like, okay, so how often can I have these foods? How often can I have red meat? How often can I have bacon? And I will always tell people, we don't have a strong, like, for person X, they can have it X number of times a week or X number of times a month. What I would say is take an inventory of what you're doing. And if you're telling me I'm having a daily source of red meat, or I'm having bacon every morning on my sandwich, like a bacon, egg, and cheese or something like that, maybe we decide to leave the bacon off more than we have it on. And one thing I do want to say too is there are a lot of meat alternatives that are on the market right now, ways that we can have burgers and things that are now from different sources of plant proteins. If you look at the labels for those, are also really heavily processed. So I have had a lot of patients that say, okay, well, can I just swap all of my red meat burgers with these? Is that a healthier option? We don't really know yet. They haven't been around for long enough. Yeah. But I would generally say, as a dietitian, I tend to say, let's try to reach for foods that are as close to their normal form as possible, right? If we have that opportunity. And so it takes a little bit more creativity than that. And that sometimes is the fun part.
And I don't know what phrase you use, but I so often ask people, or will say, tell me about your pattern of eating. We are not talking about one bacon cheeseburger. We're talking about 365 days a year, multiple years, multiple meals a day. Like, we eat a lot of food, guys. So this is never about one meal or one bite. Peter, thank you so much for coming on Nutrition. You are a wealth of knowledge. And I just wanted to say, I think your patients are so lucky to have you.
Well, thanks for having me, Tara. It's been a pleasure. And I would love to come back anytime.
Please. Cancer prevention through nutrition is nuanced. While there are some foods to avoid or limit, like charred red meat or alcohol, you don't need to be a stickler. Soy, carbs, coffee, and organic foods individually don't make a difference in prevention, but fruits, veggies, and the antioxidants in them generally do. But remember, just like nutrition and exercise can't necessarily prevent cancer, they also can't cure it alone either. If you or a loved one gets a diagnosis, know that nutrition is just one tool in your toolkit, along with treatment. 1 in 18 Americans is a cancer survivor, and that number is only growing. And one day, hopefully soon, this won't be a diagnosis at all. That's all for this episode. If you have a follow-up question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we'll answer it in a future episode. On the next episode of On Nutrition, seed oils.
So if you're going out there and you're thinking, oh, Jesse said seed oils are good for me, and start taking seed oil shots to start your day, don't do that.
For more On Nutrition episodes and resources, check us out online at mayoclinic.org/onnutrition. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening. And until next time, eat well and be well.
Shopify is a global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business and sell more with less effort thanks to the Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/redcircle, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/redcircle now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/redcircle.